Paolo Maldini, Franz Beckenbauer, Alessandro Nesta, Fabio Cannavaro, and Franco Baresi. These are some of the greatest defenders in football history. But in the pantheon of football's immortals, there is one who I believe is in the same tier. A quieter legend whose game was defined by grit, intelligence, and an insane winning mentality. Because while many football fans might not talk about him as much, Marcel Desailly sits shoulder to shoulder with some of the best to ever do it. And you need no look further than his nickname of The Rock. And rightfully so. But ironically enough, to describe his defense as rock solid is kind of disingenuous, because truthfully, it was more like solid steel. Desailly was the bridge between elegance and brutality. Not only did he play gracious as a center back, not only did he have physical dominance, but more often than not, he wouldn't even let the opposition striker receive the ball. Because perhaps the reason why he was known as The Rock was because when midfielders would play balls to strikers, he made it feel like there was a literal stone blocking the ball. Because to call Marcel Desailly a center back isn't quite right. He was more like a defensive midfielder who was just so good at defending that playing him as a center back just felt more like a cheat code. He would glide into tackles with the precision of a surgeon. And when he defended, he didn't just stop attacks. He completely broke the rhythm of his opposition. A man who won literally every major trophy that football has to offer. He was the embodiment of the saying, defense wins championships. Not only was he the man of the match in a Champions League final, but he became the first player in football history to win back-to-back Champions Leagues with two different clubs. Looking back at his career, Marcel Desailly's trophy cabinet is easy to quantify. Several major club titles, Champions League trophies, a Euros winner, and a World Cup winner. But looking at him as a player alone is a lot harder to romanticize. So for those of you who don't remember or don't quite know, I'm here to remind you just how invaluable of a player he was and show you just why Marcel Desailly truly belongs up there with some of the greatest defenders of all time. When Desailly first began his career at Nantes, he developed more than just defensive skills. Perhaps equally as important, he would adapt an incredible football intelligence. He started off as a center back, but his managers quickly realized that he could also be of incredible use as a defensive midfielder as well. And it was this tactical versatility in his development that would come to define his entire career. He had the timing, anticipation, and spatial awareness that made him feel a step ahead of the play and mature beyond his years, almost as if he was defending with a sixth sense. And it was during these first 6 years at FC Nantes that Desailly quickly established himself as one of the most promising defenders in Europe. Unlike many prodigies who shined with flair, Desailly's rise was more cerebral. Coaches at the club were struck not just by his athleticism, but his incredible defensive understanding. He wasn't exactly the fastest defender, but he always seemed to arrive exactly when he needed to, intercepting passes, sweeping danger, or winning aerial duels with minimal effort. What also set him apart at a young age was his incredible composure. Unlike many defenders we see who struggle with the ball in their possession or just seem a little panicky, when he had the ball, he could transition from defense to attack, and he always did it with a calm and measured distribution. This would make him the perfect anchor to the defense, stopping opposition threats before they could fully develop, being a safe option to always pass to and playmake himself, and also being an incredibly disruptive force whenever the opposition did break through. Still in his early 20s, Desailly was already being known as one of the best French defenders in the world. That's why in 1992, Olympique de Marseille decided to go and sign him. And it was in Marseille that he would turn from a rising talent into a solidified world-class defender. And with a much better squad around him, Desailly's already great ability would only multiply and show his true value. Because in Marseille, he would once again move up to play as a defensive midfielder. It was like he was the missing piece to completely unlock the club and turn them into an unstoppable team. He would be tasked with patrolling the midfield and bringing intensity and control, and this made them a complete nightmare for the opposition. In a midfield battle with Desailly, the opposition's possession game was completely struggling. Him running around everywhere and winning balls, intercepting passes, and stopping the attack in its tracks really made it easier for his teammates like Rudi Völler and Didier Deschamps to freely roam and do what they did best. And with defensive dominance already established at the midfield, beating this 1992-93 Marseille squad was incredibly difficult. But nothing that season sums up his value in the pitch more than the 1993 Champions League final. just ask that mighty AC Milan squad how monumental Desailly was. In a team that had Franco Baresi, Paolo Maldini, Jean-Pierre Papin, Frank Rijkaard, and Marco van Basten. It was no other than Marcel Desailly that really outshined them all. He was everywhere on the pitch, disrupting Milan's rhythm, out-defending Paolo Maldini and Baresi, and made the mighty AC Milan's attack completely useless. And once Marseille was able to break through in the 44th minute, the defense was just much too great for Milan to overcome. And that day, they became the first and only French team to lift the European Cup. He had just gone toe-to-toe with one of Europe's greatest dynasties and teams, completely dismantling their attack. And perhaps the most telling thing about just how good Marcel Desailly really was, the very team that he had just beat would immediately bring him in the following season to come and join them. Because if AC Milan thought that they were just getting a midfield destroyer, they would soon realize that they had just signed something far more valuable. Because at Milan, Desailly was converted back into a central defender. And what's even more is that he would slip in seamlessly with one of the most iconic defensive lineups in football history, right alongside Paolo Maldini and Franco Baresi, literally standing by them side by side. And by the end of this video, I just might convince you that he also stands among them side by side in the defensive history books. Because while most players would be daunted by the sheer pedigree of that back line, Desailly would completely thrive. And he didn't just complement the defense, he would elevate it to another level. While Baresi orchestrated from the back and Maldini glided across the flank, Desailly was the enforcer. He was the one who made sure that the opposition strikers would completely forget how the ball felt. Because that very following 1993-94 season, if the saying that defense wins championships wasn't already true, Desailly, along with that Milan defense, made sure that defense guaranteed a championship. That Milan squad conceded just 15 goals in 34 Serie A matches. Statistically, if you were facing that Milan squad, the chances of your team scoring only a single goal against them was 44%. But even then, it was in Europe that Desailly truly left his mark once more. Manager Fabio Capello deployed Desailly in a hybrid role during no other than the Champions League final against Barcelona. And might I remind you, this was the team coached by Johan Cruyff, known as the Dream Team. However, that dream would turn into a nightmare for Barcelona. Milan would completely destroy them 4-0, with Desailly not only putting a defensive masterclass once more, dominating aerial battles, breaking plays, and completely taking Romario out of the match, making it impossible for Romario to do anything. He would even decide to show off his ability, scoring the final goal himself as he ran from deep. This would make him the first player to ever win back-to-back Champions Leagues with 2 different clubs, a record that stood for nearly 2 decades until Samuel Eto'o did the same. But Desailly's brilliance at Milan didn't just end there. He was the player who brought consistency to the back line over years and years. His positioning was nearly flawless, cutting off passing lanes before they even opened. Also, his aerial presence was elite. Standing at just over 6 feet or 185 centimeters, he wasn't exactly the biggest defender. However, he was incredibly athletic and powerful, easily outjumping anyone on the pitch due to his incredible timing and insane physique. Even few defenders in history could match up with his one-on-one defending. However, unless it was an absolutely brilliant pass or insane cross, Desailly rarely ever lost duels or failed to intercept the ball. He showed strikers just enough space to tempt them. Then he would come crashing in with force. But unlike more rash tacklers, he didn't dive in recklessly. He waited, calculated, and executed with precision. And comparing Desailly to other great defenders really illuminates the variety of his skills. Unlike Franco Baresi, who was more of a libero and relied on reading the game with minimal physical engagement, Desailly could do both, read and destroy. Compared to Cannavaro, Desailly was slower, but he was much stronger and much more versatile. Sergio Ramos offered physical defense and an attacking threat, but at times he would have gaps in his positioning and flaws in his discipline. Desailly, in contrast, rarely got sent off. And compared to Maldini's one-on-one defending, although Maldini did have him beat, Desailly was not far off. After 6 years with AC Milan and winning every trophy in the league, in 1998, Desailly would move to Chelsea. A surprising choice at the time, as the Premier League hadn't become yet the global juggernaut it is today. and this was a time before Chelsea had the oil money. But still, his influence in the club can't be overstated. They had just finished at 4th place the season prior, and were still chasing the Premier League or FA Cup glory. But with his arrival, he would slowly help build the club's defensive structure and long-term consistency. And it was Marcel Desailly that would really go and mentor the young John Terry. Terry himself even credits him as a mentor who taught him not only how to defend, but also how to understand the game more and how to lead his team. Desailly became a mentor of positioning, composure under pressure, and discipline to hold the line. And in just his 2nd season, Chelsea would win the FA Cup, re-establishing themselves as a top 3 club in English football. He might not have lifted the Premier League, but his professionalism, defensive mastery, and leadership were incredibly important in building the foundation for the players that José Mourinho would later take over and use to build in Chelsea's dominance. Meanwhile, Desailly's influence on the international stage hit new heights. Between 1996 and 2004, he was the undisputed leader of France's defense. In the 1998 World Cup, he was the central pillar in the back line, helping France concede just 2 goals in the entire tournament. And while Zidane was the heart of the squad, Marcel Desailly was the general on the pitch, organizing, rallying, and enforcing. And like they always do when it mattered most, his best performances came in the knockout stages. Against Italy in the quarterfinal, Desailly neutralized the aerial threat of Christian Vieri. In the semi-final against Croatia, he recovered the ball multiple times to bail out his fullbacks. And in the final against Brazil, even though he received a yellow card and was sent off, for 70 minutes he helped completely neutralize Rivaldo and Bebeto, always stopping the Brazilian attack as they tried to make a comeback. Just as Zidane was the nation's hero that day, Desailly and France's defense had his back. Even 2 years later in Euro 2000, Desailly would be named the captain of the French squad, and his defense and leadership would help France dominate the tournament, making them the first team since West Germany to be defending both World Cup and European championships. And at that point, he had become the most capped player in French history, because almost as good as his defending, football intelligence, positioning, and timing was his consistency. Because even in the twilight of his career, Desailly remained a defensive marvel. And while his physical ability did deteriorate, his mind was still as sharp as ever. Across 3 different leagues and over a decade at the top level, Desailly wasn't just great for a moment, he was great for a generation. When we talk about all-time great defenders, through impact, adaptability, and consistency in the biggest stages, Marcel Desailly belongs firmly in that conversation. He wasn't the product of a defensive system, because even before AC Milan, he was the system. Yet despite the overflowing trophy cabinet and accolades, Desailly never quite received the global adoration that others in his generation enjoyed. He didn't become a cultural icon of the game, but his legacy and ability is unshakably excellent. In many ways, he was ahead of his time, a modern defender in a transitional era. His blend of strength, technique, flexibility, and focus truly would make him the perfect player in today's high-speed, high-pressing world. Even compared to most of the other great defenders, his ability and style of play would work well in any era. So I guess that's why his nickname, The Rock, really is perfect. It was about his reliability and his solidity, an unspoken promise that while he was there, your house would not fall. That's why in the history books of the greatest defenders of all time, Marcel Desailly deserves his place, not just as a great defender, but as one of the game's truest champions. He was rock solid when it mattered most.